If you aren't already familiar with the web portal, it's an open online communications hub for security-related information. It's a forum that allows you to post time-sensitive announcements, such as be on the lookout, as well as allow individuals who are not prospective users to report on incidents. This can really unlock the reporting potential of your system by capturing incidents more quickly and efficiently from sources outside of Perspective. In a previous video, we looked at the general setup and configuration of a web portal page. In this video, we'll focus specifically on the Report an Incident feature and look at what configuration can be done in this area. As you can see, I've already logged in. If you need some more information on how to log in to complete the general setup mentioned earlier, please watch the general setup and themes video. As mentioned earlier, the Report an Incident function allows someone who is not a user of Perspective to complete a simplified incident report that can be submitted to your system for review and possible acceptance. The first configuration option here is enabling this feature in the first place. Do you want to give people the ability to submit an incident? By default, this is automatically enabled, so if you do not wish to use this feature, uncheck the box. Next is the Display UDFs box. If your Perspective incident data form includes a user-defined fields section and you wish those fields to appear on this e-incident form, then check the box. Then scroll down to the bottom and click the Submit button at the bottom of the page. You won't see these fields added to this section until you do this. If you're not familiar with UDFs, these are additional data entry fields that are added to your data forms specifically for your organization to meet your reporting needs that are currently not captured by the out-of-the-box version of Perspective. The biggest consideration here is who is your audience. If you choose to include UDFs, will the people accessing this form know how to complete the data entry for just some or potentially all of these fields? Next, just below in the General section, you can see the data entry fields that exist on the general page of the e-incident form. These are the initial data entry fields that will be seen, and at a minimum, they would have to complete all of the required fields from this section before they could submit their e-incident. It should be noted that there are a few fields on the form that don't appear in this section. The first name, last name, incident occurred, date time field, and class rollup. These are all system required fields, and as such, they cannot be modified in terms of being required or hidden. Therefore, they don't show in this list. So, in this area, for the fields that we do currently have listed, which ones do we not want people to see or use? We would uncheck the visible box. There are some considerations here. In the case of the Is Anonymous field, do you want to give people the ability to report anonymously? If this is left visible, when somebody is completing a form and they check this box, this will automatically populate anonymous into the first and last name fields and hide the rest of the reported by section, which could also include the phone number and email address fields. Hiding this option will enforce the first name and last name required fields, meaning the person completing the form must put a name into this section. Another consideration is with the ability to add involved persons, organizations, vehicles, and items. While the details of these involvements can capture a great deal of information, adding these does not automatically create a record for them within Perspective. This may have to be done after the e-incident has been accepted into Perspective. So, do you want or need people to report on any potential involvements? Finally, towards the bottom, you'll see there are both incident summary and incident narrative field options. Both of these can be used for capturing more detail on the incident. In the case of the narratives field, a key consideration has to do with the e-incidents that have been submitted if a narrative is entered on it. An overlooked system required field within Perspective is the narrative author. This is often overlooked because users don't select the author. The field is locked and the value automatically defaults to the logged in user. In the case of the web portal, as we have discussed, not only are person records not created based on the reported by details or any involved persons that have been added, but also if you have the anonymous option available, then the system cannot automatically add the author as it does in Perspective, because it doesn't know who the person should be. But since it is required, you must select who this person is when it's in the gateway. So, who should that person be? There is no blanket right answer to this scenario. It should lead to an internal discussion within your organization as to best practice when it comes to identifying this. But keep in mind, in this event, you only need to choose who the narrative author is if you choose to keep the narrative field visible for data entry. Now, for the fields that you have chosen to keep visible, are there any that you feel should be required for data entry? so that a person must complete the data entry on those fields before they can submit an e-incident. In those cases, make sure you check the required checkbox. One important consideration here has to do again with the involved person, organization, vehicle, and item options. Although you can choose to make these required, be cautious if doing so. What if an incident doesn't involve one of those entities that you choose to make required? You'd be forcing somebody to enter data for an involvement that doesn't exist, which could greatly affect your reporting. If you had enabled the display UDFs option and had saved your portal page previously, you would now see the UDFs appear below. And again, as with the other fields we've just looked at, enable the visibility and required options for any of the user-defined fields that are listed. Back up at the top of the section, you can also see the involved person, item, organization, and vehicle. Clicking these will display the fields that can be completed when a person does click the Add Person, Item, Organization, or Vehicle buttons that will be visible on the e-incident form, assuming these options are kept visible for data entry as we just finished discussing. Again, we can see a list of the data fields that could be completed, and there are some fields that are not listed here. In the case of a person, the first name, last name, and involvement type fields are not listed, as these will be system required values if somebody is adding a person. But for the other fields that are listed here, again, set the visibility and required options as needed. One consideration here specific to the person that you may notice is the height and weight. These fields indicate the data must be entered in metric, and currently this cannot be changed. Height must be entered in centimeters and weight in kilograms. The information in the database is stored in metric, and although there is a setting in Perspective that can convert these to feet and inches and pounds, that setting does not exist for the web portal. For the involved item, again, configure the fields as needed. The fields on the form that are not seen here because they're required are the item name and involvement type fields. Similarly, for the involved organization, the organization name and involvement type are the minimum required fields. Otherwise, configure the rest of the fields for visibility and required as needed. And for the involved vehicle, the license plate and involvement type are the required fields. And again, we'll configure the remaining fields for visibility and required as needed as well. Now, even though there are default required fields and other potentially required fields that you identify on each of these involvement forms, just note that they are not actually enforced until somebody clicks on the appropriate Add Person, Add Item, Add Organization, or Add Vehicle buttons, unless, as we discussed, you had chosen to make them required back on the general form. Really quickly now, we can take a look at this functionality in action by going to our main page and clicking on the Report an Incident button to see how we can submit from here. This completes the configuration of the Report an Incident functionality. For more information on how to deal with e-incidents submitted to the gateway, please watch the Gateway e-incidents snippet video. And for more information on how to configure the Request an Officer features, please watch the appropriate Request an Officer dispatch log or dispatch videos.